I stood in the circular driveway of the Riverside estate, watching my sister Vanessa's wedding coordinator direct traffic with the intensity of an air traffic controller. Behind me, the venue gleamed, all white columns and manicured gardens, the kind of place that charged by the minute. "Rachel, honey, we have a situation." My mother appeared at my elbow, slightly breathless. She wore her mother of the bride dress and her crisis management face. "The valet service sent 2 fewer people than we paid for. Can you help park cars for the first hour?" I looked down at my bridesmaid dress, sage green silk that Vanessa had chosen because it complemented her vision. Not exactly valet attire. "Mom, I'm in the wedding party. The ceremony isn't for 90 minutes. You'll just help until the actual valet staff gets situated. Please, Rachel. We need someone responsible and you're not doing anything else right now." That last phrase hung in the air. Not doing anything. The same phrase my family had been using for the past 6 months since I'd left my job at the State Department without explaining why. "Fine," I said, taking the key fob she pressed into my hand. Vanessa emerged from the venue, her getting-ready robe billowing behind her. "Oh, perfect. Rachel can do it. She's good at service-oriented tasks." She smiled like she'd given me a compliment. "Just think of it as practice for whatever you end up doing next." My brother-in-law-to-be Marcus laughed from behind her. "At least she's making herself useful. Better than sitting around all day." I'd left my position as senior trade negotiator at the State Department 6 months ago. What my family didn't know was that I'd been recruited by the United Nations for something bigger, leading the negotiation team for a historic multilateral trade agreement between 12 nations. The announcement was scheduled for next week, after 18 months of secret negotiations in Geneva, Singapore, and New York. The work had been grueling and completely confidential. I'd signed NDAs that made attorney-client privilege look casual. My family knew I'd left state, so I wasn't working a traditional job, and filled in the blanks with their own assumptions. Vanessa had decided I was finding myself. My mother worried I was depressed. Marcus just thought I'd failed. None of them had asked what I was actually doing. "Happy to help," I said, keeping my voice level. The guests began arriving. I parked sedans and SUVs, smiled politely, and tried not to think about the irony of spending my morning as an impromptu valet while my actual job involved negotiating billion-dollar trade deals with heads of state. Vanessa had always been the golden child, beautiful, charming, married to old money. Marcus came from a family of commercial real estate developers who measured worth in property values and country club memberships. This wedding was their coronation, a display of connections and status. "Rachel." My mother rushed over. "The Hendersons are here. You remember them, they own half the waterfront properties downtown. Make sure you're extra careful with their car." I nodded and took the keys from Mr. Henderson, who didn't make eye contact. I was the help today. Invisible. By the time the actual valet staff arrived to take over, I'd parked 37 cars and fielded a dozen comments about my current situation. Aunt Linda had asked if I was still looking for work. A family friend mentioned her son's company was hiring administrative assistants. Marcus's father had pressed his business card into my hand with a pitying smile, suggesting I call about an entry-level position. I changed back into my bridesmaid heels and joined the other bridesmaids in the bridal suite. Vanessa was having her makeup touched up, holding court while friends and family fluttered around her. "Thank God that's sorted," Vanessa said, seeing me. "I was having a panic attack about the parking situation. You really saved us, Rachel. You don't need some fancy career to contribute. Just being helpful is enough." The other bridesmaids murmured agreement. I smiled and said nothing. Then Vanessa's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and her eyes went wide. "Oh my God. Marcus just texted. Ambassador Chin is here. From Singapore. He's apparently in town for diplomatic meetings and Marcus's father invited him months ago as a courtesy. He didn't think he'd actually come." My stomach dropped. Ambassador Chin. I'd spent the last 3 weeks negotiating directly with him in New York, finalizing the technology transfer provisions of our trade agreement. We'd had dinner 2 nights ago celebrating the breakthrough that would be announced next week. "This is amazing," Vanessa continued, breathless. "Do you know what this means? Having an actual ambassador at our wedding? The photos alone. Marcus's father is beside himself. This is the kind of guest that matters." The ceremony was beautiful. I stood at the altar in my sage green dress, holding my bouquet, watching Vanessa and Marcus exchange vows. Ambassador Chen sat in the third row with other distinguished guests, diplomatic and composed. He'd seen me at the altar. Our eyes had met briefly and I'd given him the smallest shake of my head. Not yet. He'd understood immediately. 18 months of negotiations had taught us to read each other's signals. The reception began with cocktail hour in the garden. I tried to stay invisible, keeping to the edges while Vanessa and Marcus worked the room. They spent 15 minutes with Ambassador Chen, their voices carrying across the garden with carefully casual name-dropping. "We're so honored you could attend, Ambassador," Marcus said. "My father has spoken so highly of your work in international commerce." "The honor is mine," Ambassador Chen replied with diplomatic warmth. "It's a beautiful celebration." Vanessa steered the conversation toward their honeymoon plans in Singapore, clearly hoping for restaurant recommendations or insider tips she could mention to friends. Ambassador Chen was gracious but non-committal. I was standing near the bar when Marcus's father approached me. "Rachel, I hope you'll seriously consider that position at our company. Entry-level, but it's a foot in the door. At your age you can't afford to be too picky." "I appreciate that, Mr. Henderson. Vanessa mentioned you've been out of work for 6 months now. That's a significant gap on a resume. Employers notice these things." Before I could respond, a member of the venue staff approached Marcus's father urgently. "Sir, there's a situation at the entrance. News fans. They're saying they're here to cover a diplomatic event." Marcus's father looked confused. "We didn't arrange press coverage." I knew exactly what was happening. The UN press office. They'd moved up the announcement timeline. The coordinator rushed over to Vanessa and Marcus. "I'm so sorry, but there are news crews at the entrance requesting access. They're saying something about a major diplomatic announcement. They have proper credentials, but we didn't clear any media." "Send them away," Vanessa said immediately. "This is my wedding, not a press conference." "Ma'am, they're quite insistent. They're saying Ambassador Chen is here for an official announcement, and they were told the UN negotiating team would be present." Everyone turned to look at Ambassador Chen, who had stood up and was walking toward our group. But he wasn't walking toward Vanessa or Marcus. He was walking toward me. "Miss Torres," he said formally, and the entire garden seemed to go quiet. "I apologize for the interruption, but the UN press office has moved up our announcement timeline. They're requesting your presence for the media briefing." My mother looked confused. "There must be some mistake. Rachel isn't involved in anything diplomatic." "I'm afraid there's no mistake, Mrs. Torres." Ambassador Chen's voice carried across the garden now, diplomatic training making him naturally commanding. "Your daughter has been serving as the chief negotiator for the United Nations multilateral trade agreement for the past 18 months. The agreement was finalized last week and the official announcement is scheduled for," he checked his phone, "approximately 20 minutes from now." The silence was absolute. Vanessa's mouth fell open. Marcus looked like someone had struck him. His father's expression cycled through confusion, disbelief, and something approaching horror as he remembered his comment about entry-level positions. "I don't understand," my mother said faintly. "Rachel, what is he talking about?" "Perhaps I can clarify," Ambassador Chen said. "I'm here today both as a wedding guest and as a representative of the Singapore delegation to the UN trade negotiations. Ms. Torres personally led the negotiation team that just finalized the largest multilateral trade agreement in 30 years. 12 nations. Representing over 4 billion people. Reducing trade barriers and creating economic frameworks that will reshape global commerce for the next generation." He paused, letting that sink in. The wedding guests had all turned to watch now, drinks forgotten. The agreement's announcement was scheduled for next week in Geneva, but certain political developments have accelerated the timeline. The UN Secretary-General is holding a press conference in New York in 15 minutes, and the media has been directed to interview key negotiators. Ms. Torres is the lead negotiator, the primary architect of the entire agreement. "But she's been unemployed," Marcus's father said weakly. "She's been working 16-hour days in confidential negotiations across 3 continents, Ambassador Chen corrected. "The youngest chief negotiator in UN history. The secrecy was legally required until the agreement was finalized. I personally was not permitted to acknowledge her role until the official announcement." He turned to me. Miss Torres, I'm afraid your cover, as it were, is officially blown. The press vans outside are from CNN, BBC, Reuters and Al Jazeera. They're here to cover the announcement and interview you specifically. The UN Communications Director is requesting you join a video call-in. He checked his phone again. 12 minutes. The wedding coordinator looked like she might faint. This is the international press? At our venue. I apologize for the disruption, Ambassador Chen said to Vanessa and Marcus. But your sister-in-law's work is of significant global importance. The timing is unfortunate but necessary. Vanessa had found her voice. Rachel, you've been working for the United Nations? This whole time? Yes. Why didn't you tell us? I signed confidentiality agreements that carried criminal penalties for disclosure. I couldn't tell you. I couldn't tell anyone until the agreement was finalized and announced. My mother sat down heavily on the nearest chair. You've been negotiating with countries? With ambassadors? With heads of state, actually, Ambassador Chen said. Ms. Torres met with 3 prime ministers, 2 presidents and countless ministers of trade and foreign affairs. She personally convinced the Chinese delegation to accept technology transfer provisions they'd been refusing for 8 years. She restructured the entire agricultural trade framework to satisfy both the American and European Union concerns. She is, without exaggeration, one of the most skilled negotiators I have encountered in 40 years of diplomatic service. Marcus's father had gone pale. I saw him glance at the business card he'd pressed into my hand earlier, the one suggesting I apply for an entry-level position at his real estate company. The parking, my mother said suddenly. We had you parking cars. Because you assumed I had nothing better to do, I said quietly. Because you saw I'd left State Department and decided I'd failed, rather than asking what I was actually doing. Vanessa looked stricken. Your pay career level. I said parking cars was your career level. The venue coordinator approached nervously. Ms. Torres, the press representatives are requesting access. They're saying this is a matter of international importance. What should I tell them? I looked at Vanessa. This was her wedding. Her day. It's fine, Vanessa said quietly. Let them in. This is important. Obviously. The next 20 minutes felt unreal. The staff set up a mini press area in the garden. I stood there in my sage green bridesmaid dress while global news crews filmed me joining a UN video call with the Secretary General. He announced the trade agreement to the world. The wedding guests stared, silent and confused, as reporters asked me questions about negotiations, economic impact and diplomacy. Ambassador Chen stood beside me, along with 2 other ambassadors who were also wedding guests. A BBC reporter asked, Ms. Torres, did you personally negotiate the intellectual property rules that stalled the deal for 10 years? Yes, I said. We created a plan that protects innovation and helps developing countries. All 12 delegations agreed. For 15 minutes, major news outlets asked questions. CNN, Reuters, Al Jazeera. When it ended, the cameras left. But the wedding guests still looked shocked. My mother was the first to speak. Rachel, why didn't you tell us? Anything. I tried, I said. But you thought I was avoiding responsibility. When I said I was traveling for work, you said I should stop running away. When I said I had meetings, you asked when I'd get a serious job. She had no answer. Marcus's father came up next, embarrassed. I owe you an apology. My comments about entry-level positions were assumptions, I said. You decided I had no value because you didn't understand my work. Vanessa stood crying in her wedding dress. I had you parking cars at my wedding. While you were finalizing an international agreement, I said gently. Yes. Why didn't you refuse? She asked. Because you're my sister. And it was your wedding day. And because the announcement was happening soon anyway. Ambassador Chen stepped in. The timing of the announcement was a UN decision. Ms. Torres had no control over it. Marcus snapped. She's been lying to us for 18 months. She was keeping classified information, the ambassador corrected. That is very different. The reception limped on, but half the guests were on their phones. My face was suddenly on CNN. Chief Negotiator Rachel Torres, 32. Social media exploded. A meme started trending, from parking cars to parking trade deals. I stayed for the cake, then left early. My phone kept ringing. Interviews, speaking offers, meeting requests. The UN sent a car to take me to the airport. I had to fly to Geneva in 36 hours. Vanessa called as I was boarding. I'm sorry. For everything. For assuming things. For the parking job. I know, I said. When you get back, can we talk? Really talk? Maybe. But Vanessa, I paused. For 18 months you saw me without a normal job and assumed I was failing. You never asked what I was actually doing. That says a lot about how you see me. She was quiet. You're right. I'm sorry. I hung up and boarded. The trade agreement kept me busy for months. The wedding moment became a case study in business schools about assumptions and hidden value. Job offers arrived from consulting firms, tech companies and governments. Marcus's father sent a formal apology. I didn't respond. My mother tried to reconnect, but our relationship was strained. Years of dismissing my choices didn't disappear overnight. Vanessa and I talk sometimes. She started volunteering at a literacy nonprofit. She said the wedding made her want to do meaningful work. I didn't remind her that meaningful work takes many shapes. 6 months later, I was offered the role of Director of International Economic Development at the UN. I accepted. The announcement made headlines again. Someone sent me a photo. Me in my bridesmaid dress at the wedding press briefing, next to me in a suit at the UN podium. The caption read, "Never assume you know someone's story." I printed it and hung it in my office. A reminder that people often don't see your work until it changes the world.